By the time Georgia had won her spot at Oakhill, the waiting list had over 1,000 people. Despairingly, she imagined them and thought of how desperately they must have wished for the safety and stability of a solar village. The drought was into its 4th year, and life was crueler and more precarious than at any time in living memory. People were rationing everything: water, fuel, and now, even food. And as the effects of a warming planet piled up, Parliament was powerless to respond, instead gripped by one stupid, petty scandal after another. Normal folk spoke mockingly of their antics, as if to reassure themselves that despite the dysfunction, life would carry on. But that cynical humor, long a feature of the Australian psyche, had never faced something quite like this. And it now served only the coldest of comforts, for the ominous, threatening reality of climate change was finally coming home to roost. And everyone, in their heart of hearts, knew it. Protruding from the ground and encircled by a scattering of dried eucalyptus leaves was the connection terminal for her plot. It was a squat concrete box, about the size of a conventional oven, which in the very middle had 3 plugs, a 12-pin Canon connector for power, and 2 copper couplings, one for water in and one for water out. Above them was a small e-ink display showing Supertree Helga, access point 4, power nominal, water I/O nominal, connection false, status not applicable, last update Sunday 22 December 2024, 3:20 p.m. GMT +11. Georgia crouched down and, pulling the ends of the hoses to the couplings, tightened the threaded fasteners with her wrench. She then reached for her crimping pliers and set the Canon connector in place. Squeezing down hard, a rubber snake carrying 250 volts and a host of digital links now connected the access point at her feet to the microhome standing behind her. The display redrew and now read, Connection, AC BC 32 BA 3177, Model, Meadow 7200 SLC, status, not initialized. "It's good to go, Jack," she called out. Georgia stood and turned to where across the glade was her new home. At 4 meters high and 7 meters long, it cut a fine, if humble, figure, and though it was an undeniably modest abode, its setting was grand, resplendent, but above all, natural. Nestled in the shady clearing beneath a supertree, it was enveloped by a bucolic splendor that surpassed anything one could find amongst the unsightly, tightly packed constructions of the city. Behind it, the setting sun cast a golden hue through the clearing, illuminating small clouds of insects buzzing above the gently waving grass. "It's perfect," she thought. All her life, Georgia had been a renter, moving house every year or two. But no longer. This was the first, and hopefully the last home she'd ever own, and it cost her a mere $80,000. The Supertree integration package had cost another $30,000, but it was still the most affordable option by a long shot, and getting a spot under a Supertree in Oakhill was a stroke of unbelievably good luck. She walked back through the mostly bare and recently vacated plot to the steps of her new home, where Jack, her new neighbor, was admiring the exterior. "I love this model," he said, running his hand across the wooden slats. Inside, Georgia saw the appliances had sprung to life, animated by a stream of electrons flowing from the Supertree. The LED shined with a cool white light, and the ceiling fan spun gently. "Shall we run the setup?" Jack asked. "Yes," she replied. "I might have some questions, so please come inside." He smiled and nodded. The two walked inside and sat down at the dining table. Georgia unslung the well-worn and oil-blotted tote from her shoulder and placed it in her lap, producing from within it a sturdy, rubberized laptop computer. "Have you used the setup utility before?" Jack asked. She had. Her friend Jessie, who'd set up at the nearby Melbourne water reservoirs, had asked for her help. She'd completed an entire setup of precisely the same model not so long ago. Yes, actually. Also, I've run the test suite on this particular unit, and have written some custom reports just for my own entertainment. But I still have a lot to learn. Before I came here, I did commercial-scale SCADA, but that was highly specialized. This kind of automation is much broader. And it's my home. A wistful smile crinkled the corner of Jack's eyes, and he recalled setting up his own home at Oakhill. He remembered on his first day Michelle scolding him, saying, "You're not just an automation engineer anymore. You have to do the plumbing, too." "Yes," he replied with a smile. "I know what you mean." Planting his hands on the table and pushing himself upwards, he stood as if uprooting an old tree, his languor reflecting a hard day's work. "What do you think you'll do with your plot?" he asked. "Well, I should start by generating keys," replied Georgia, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. OV-link show. 1:Helga: MTU 1500 QDisk MQ state UPQLEN 1000 link ether AC BC 32 BA 31 77. "Helga," she mused. "I love it," she said, chuckling. Georgia performed the keygen and configured her home's controller to interface with Supertree Helga. After the interface was established, she executed the setup utility. "Welcome to VillageHub Supertree AP Generator. Link established to Supertree Helga. Creating ledger and synchronizing systems." It would take about 30 minutes for her home's solar, battery, water, and wastewater systems to synchronize with the Oakhill dome. Helga was one of 12 trees that in total provided 48 connection points, supporting just over 100 full-time residents. Altogether, the system had generated a surplus of electricity, which the community had sold back to the grid for 5 years running. While the utility completed, Georgia and Jack went to sit in the garden beneath the Supertree. When we first set up, there was no perimeter wall. No walls, you know? But it left us vulnerable. Outsiders were loitering and then stealing from us, harassing our people. "I heard about it," Georgia said. Jack was a veteran of Oakhill, part of the first intake after the founders had set up in 2019. Like Georgia, he'd been an automation engineer, which had set him up to be a valuable member of the community. He'd been there practically from the start, through the good times and the bad. "That's right," replied Jack. "It made the news," he said somberly. Georgia recalled the newscast. "Chaotic brawl rocks Oakhill." And though she knew it was a sensitive topic, curiosity got the better of her. "What actually happened that night?" she asked. "Well, basically it was like 3 a.m., and a group of men tried to rob the village. I guess they thought we were an easy target, or that we didn't have surveillance equipment. Anyways, I really didn't like that. So Matthew and I went and confronted them. Michelle, who's far more compassionate than I, said that these were desperate people. The government had failed them, and that the police would take care of it. But I was angry at them just for showing up. I don't like to admit it, but I'm an angry person, and I hate what the outside world has become. When it turned up on my lawn, it was a brawl, and the most of the guys ran off. One of them stayed and fought, and pretty much we beat the shit out of him. He's okay now, but we put him in hospital, and I did some time for the assault. My sentence was reduced because the lawyer successfully argued that my blameless desire to protect the community reduced my moral culpability for the offense. But honestly, I don't regret it, and I'd do it again. His story was a lot to take in. Georgia paused a moment and said, "That's why you built the wall." "Yep," he concurred. Most people in the community were dead against it. I mean, it's a 3-meter concrete wall with razor wire. It's an eyesore, and it goes against one of our most important principles: no walls. But I felt that the alternative was more invasions and robberies. And eventually, he shrugged, Michelle agreed. Georgia knew how dangerous the city had become. His story was all too familiar, and she felt a painful lump in her throat. "I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I was robbed, too," she said. "It was a similar thing. A couple of guys just kicked my door in. My dog attacked them, so they killed her. They took a bunch of my stuff, and the police never found them. It was the most terrifying night of my life." Jack looked away and then down at his feet. He shook his head. "I'm so sorry, Georgia. When did this happen?" "A few days before I applied for Oakhill." "Well, shit," he said with a deep sigh. "So, you've been under the Supertree for 5 years now?" replied Georgia, changing the subject. "Yep, 5 years," he replied. "And you really never paid an electricity or water bill?" "That is correct. I just do my part to keep this place running." Georgia looked over her shoulder and up at the Supertree behind her. It stood tall and strong, imposing and beautiful. Its trunk was shrouded with ferns, vines, and orchids, and its intricate pattern of steel branches fanned out into a wide canopy, gorgeous and dotted with twinkling fairy lights. "It's beautiful. Did you design her?" Jack shifted in his chair so that he now faced Helga. "I did," he exclaimed. "The steelwork is standard, but I did a fair bit of work on the batteries, which you can't see because they're housed inside about halfway up the trunk. Those plans are now used throughout the village, by the way." "Yes, I reviewed them," replied Georgia. "First when I was reading about Oakhill, and then in preparation for the entrance exam. I saw on VillageHub that your code is used in a few villages." "Yep, that's right. Jenny maintains a fork up in Mill Park, and we exchange pull requests from time to time. She did some excellent work on the load balancer, and also the access point, but she's most famous for her wastewater code. That repo has something like 5,000 favorites on VillageHub." "Wow," said Georgia. "She sounds like a capable engineer." "She is. We run a lot of her code because it just works. As the maintainer of Helga, I get to choose the software it runs, and I opt for Jenny's development branch. I even share our diagnostic logs with her. Whenever she pushes new code, I get a notification, print the parts, install them, and reboot the tree. And so far, I haven't had a single problem." "So I guess I could make some upstream contributions?" Georgia asked, smiling. "You bet," Jack replied. "I also did the panel control assembly, and the actual controller for the panels. On this hill we get a lot of sun, so our refresh rate is pretty damn high. We are exceedingly lucky to be where we are. Georgia felt lucky, which was unusual for her. It's a really nice spot. And does Helga have a voice interface too? Jack chuckled and said, "Helga, status report." In the twilight of the clearing, the Supertree lit up in a fantastic display of multicolored light. Traveling from the tips of each branch down to the trunk, the light gathered, swirled, and faded to a dim blue glow, which then pulsated with the amplitude of a computer voice. Energy at 85%. Water at 65%. Replenish rates okay. All systems nominal. Breaking into a smile, Georgia was overcome with a playful, childlike joy. Another unusual sensation. "Helga, I love her," she said, beaming. "Yeah, actually, installing those lights was easier than you'd think. They're just really long, flexible LED strips, and it's a standard animation that I downloaded from VillageHub. The only aesthetic touch I added was the plasma ball." "There's a plasma ball?" "Yeah, it's inside. If you touch it, the tree lights up." But in all seriousness, you can see why people want to live here. While our batteries never dip below 50%, most people out there are still burning gas, which is expensive, as I'm sure you're aware. Yep. Last quarter, my gas bill was over $1,000. Oof, Jack scoffed. "Lucky for you, that'll be the last bill you ever pay." "Yeah, well, not having to pay for utilities is definitely a top feature. But to be honest, the main reason I came is this," Georgia said, gesturing to the gardens around them. "To live in a garden, under supertrees, working together for a common purpose, with no fences. I feel like life was always meant to be like this." Jack agreed, nodding silently. "That's why I came too. Life outside was ridiculous, everyone wondering why they're so miserable. But to me it was obvious. Of course, back when we started, we weren't sure it would work. Oakhill was just a crazy idea. But dreams can come true. You know, we've run an energy surplus every year. Even through this drought, we've got enough energy and water to cultivate most of our own food, and we easily make up the rest with our trade surplus. Our workshop prints a lot of stuff for the other villages, and we've contributed more to VillageHub than any other single community." A cool breeze blew through the grove, and Jack and Georgia sat in silence, smiling and ponderous. After a short time, Jack said, "Well, I'm always happy to meet newcomers who can configure an access point, Georgia." He stood, and before taking his leave, said, "You've got a beautiful home there, and the systems seem to be working fine. I'm sure you'll love it. And if you're keen to get your hands dirty, I'm headed to the Dome tomorrow morning for a planning meeting. If you're ready, you should come along. We've got a full schedule of works on the aquaponics, which is both interesting and important." "That sounds great," she replied. "I'll see you tomorrow." Jack smiled and turned to his plot, where a simple microhome was surrounded by rows of robotically tended crops. "See you tomorrow." As he left, the base of the supertree became ringed with dim yellow light. The branches lit up, dotted with gently pulsing pointiles of white light, like stars twinkling in the night sky. Georgia sat there for a long while, gazing at the sublime display. "It's too good to be true," she thought, and with that, she went inside her new home to sleep.